I never believed in stories about ghost ships. For me, a deep-sea vehicle maintenance engineer, the ocean was always just an environment, an aggressive one, demanding precise calculations and unwavering adherence to protocols. But what we encountered last year off the coast of Alaska forced me to reconsider my entire relationship with reality. We found an undersea laboratory that, according to every official report, had been destroyed nearly half a century ago. And the most terrifying part? It was still running. It all started on May 23rd, 2024. Our vessel, the Pathfinder, was on a routine assignment in the Gulf of Alaska. We were mapping the seabed for a new fiber optic cable, a dull, monotonous task. For weeks, we crawled along our designated course, and the only entertainment was arguing about whose Spotify playlist was worse. I was responsible for the maintenance and calibration of the equipment, primarily our remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, which we called Triton. That day, I was in my cabin, reviewing hydraulics reports, when the ship's intercom crackled. It was Captain Miller, calling me to the bridge. His voice was calm, as always, but it held a note I had learned to recognize over years of working together. Extreme curiosity. On the bridge, the entire on-duty watch had already gathered. Miller, a gray-haired man with a face weathered by 1,000 nautical miles, silently pointed to the side-scan sonar screen. Usually, it showed nothing but dreary ridges of volcanic rock and silt deposits. But now, right in the center of the display, was an object. It was huge, perfectly symmetrical, and undeniably artificial. "What do you make of it, Alex?" Miller asked, his eyes glued to the screen. I looked closer. The structure had clear rectangular outlines connected by what looked like transit tunnels. The material density was abnormally high for the area. The sonar was screaming metal, and a massive amount of it. "Looks like some kind of station or a sunken platform," I suggested, but there's nothing on the charts for this sector. No shipwrecks, no decommissioned structures. The bottom is supposed to be clean. The depth here is about 2,000 feet. "My point exactly," Miller nodded. "No records. I've checked every database, right down to Cold War-era military archives. Nothing." On board with us was Dr. Thorne, a marine biologist from the Klein Company. He was a man of science to his core, and the sight of such an anomaly practically made him vibrate with excitement. "We have to inspect it," he declared, squeezing closer to the screen. "This could be anything. An unknown geological phenomenon, though unlikely. Or something else." The decision was Miller's. Deviating from the course meant a breach of contract, fines, and questions from corporate. But the potential value of the find was too great. Old military tech, rare materials, not to mention the scientific significance. After a brief satellite phone call with the office in Seattle, who, surprisingly, gave a quick green light for reconnaissance, Miller gave the order, "Get Triton ready, Alex. Let's see what's hiding down there." The ROV's descent took about an hour. We gathered in the control room, where several large monitors broadcasted a feed from Triton's cameras. As it plunged, the water grew darker, the only source of light being our robot's powerful floodlights. Finally, at a depth of 1,900 feet, something gigantic began to emerge from the blackness. It was a station. Unquestionably, it consisted of several massive cylindrical modules connected by pressurized walkways. The structure looked surprisingly intact, apart from a thick layer of marine sediment and colonies of deep-sea anemones. But what was truly bizarre was that some of the external lights on the station's hull were glowing, dimly but clearly. Their light cast an eerie, ghostly halo around the structure. "It has power," muttered Ben, our ROV pilot. "How is that possible?" I had no answer. Autonomous power sources exist, of course, but none are designed for decades of continuous operation in such conditions. Ben slowly maneuvered Triton around the station's perimeter. We saw no identifying marks, no flags, no names, no company logos. Just bare, dark metal, designed with pure utility in mind. Then we saw the main airlock, and what made us all fall silent. The outer airlock door was ajar, just a few inches, but it was enough to know that something was fundamentally wrong. Leaving a main airlock unsealed at this depth is guaranteed suicide. Maybe an emergency decompression? Thorne suggested. Then the station would have flooded in seconds. I countered. The pressure at this depth would have crushed it like a soda can, but it's intact and the lights are on. The discussion aboard the Pathfinder was long and tense. The corporation, having received the first images, went into a frenzy. Orders started pouring in. Secure the area. Conduct a preliminary survey. Assess the possibility of salvage. The value of such a find could be in the hundreds of millions. After 2 days of briefings and instructions, the decision was made to send a manned submersible for docking and an internal inspection. The team consisted of 3 people. Me, as a technical specialist, Ben as the pilot and most experienced diver, and Dr. Thorne, whose knowledge might be useful for assessing the station's condition and potential biological hazards. Our submersible, the Neptune, was a reliable machine rated for much greater depths. The descent was routine. We detached from the Pathfinder and began our slow plunge into the abyss. Inside the cramped cabin of the Neptune, the only sounds were the hum of the life support systems and our comm radio check-ins. When the station appeared in our floodlights, it looked even more monumental and alien than it had on Triton's video feed. It was a dead, silent creation of human hands, forgotten at the bottom of the ocean. Ben skillfully guided the submersible toward the partially open airlock. Our mission was to dock with the outer ring and attempt to access the station systems. We weren't going to enter until we had a complete picture. Initiating docking procedure, Ben reported. Mechanical clamp activated. To our collective astonishment, the moment the Neptune's docking collar touched the station's airlock ring, it came to life. Indicators lit up, and we heard vibration through the hull, the sound of working machinery. The station system had automatically recognized our docking request and was beginning to equalize the pressure in the airlock chamber. "It's working," Thorne whispered. "It's fully functional." "Alex, can you connect to their network?" Ben asked, his hands steady on the controls. "We need to figure out what this place is." I deployed the external interface panel. Most underwater systems, even military ones, have standard protocols for emergency access. I ran a scan, and a few seconds later, a response appeared on my screen. The station's network was active, a basic, unsecured guest network. I logged in and began searching for system logs, any file that could give us a name or an identifier. Finally, I found what I was looking for. It was a general system log, viewable without a password. I opened it. Simple text information appeared on the screen. No logos, no graphics, just lines of code and system statuses. I scrolled up to the very first root message. Station identifier, Leviathan. Project, Prometheus. System status, active. Crew complement. 8. Day of last general log entry, November 17th, 1979. I felt a chill run down my spine, one that had nothing to do with the temperature in the cabin. November 17th, 1979. After our discovery, Miller had pulled up all available archives. He'd found a brief mention in the U.S. Coast Guard reports. An experimental research station, Leviathan, owned by a private consortium, was declared missing in December 1979 after communications were lost. Later, based on analysis of seismic activity in the area, it was concluded that a catastrophic hull breach had occurred due to an undersea landslide. The entire crew of 8 was officially declared dead. I looked at Ben, then at Thorne. "We have a problem," I said, my voice sounding hollow and distant. "This station thinks it's 1979 and that its entire crew is alive and on board." The message on my screen hadn't changed. System status, active. Crew complement, 8. The silence in the Neptune's cabin became almost tangible. Ben was frozen, his hands hovering over control panel. Thorne, sitting behind us, leaned forward, his breathing audible in my headset. We looked at each other, and each of us saw the same thing in the other's eyes. Complete, absolute bewilderment. "That's impossible," Ben finally said, his voice hoarse. "A computer can't just freeze in time for 45 years. The batteries, the cooling systems, the data drives, everything should have degraded and failed." Unless the power source is something we don't know about, Thorne countered. And if the system was designed to constantly overwrite and update itself, leaving no trace of degradation, it's like some kind of isolated, closed loop. I relayed the information to the Pathfinder. Silence fell on the bridge. Captain Miller asked me several times if I was sure of what I was seeing. I confirmed it. I dictated the exact lines from the system log to him. Then he ordered us to stay put and take no action until further instructions. The wait was agonizing. We sat in our submersible, docked to a ghost station that believed itself to be fully functional. The light from its portholes now seemed not just strange, but sinister. It was proof that some processes were happening inside. Something was consuming energy. Something was maintaining the systems. After 2 hours that felt like an eternity, Miller came back on the line. His voice was tense. Corporate, having received our data, had contacted someone else. Who exactly? Miller didn't specify, but his tone implied they weren't civilians. The order was clear and non-negotiable. We had to go inside. The mission was defined as assessing the state of the object and retrieving information media. We were assigned Protocol Cerberus, a term I'd never heard in corporate directives before. It meant the highest level of caution and the collection of all data without exception. Alex, Ben, Thorne, Miller said, his voice leaving no room for argument. You're going in. Your objective is to proceed to the central control post. If possible, collect air and water samples, any documents, and photograph everything. Don't touch anything unless absolutely necessary, and report in every 15 minutes. If we lose contact for more than 20 minutes, we initiate an emergency recall procedure. Understood. We confirmed. Ben began preparing the Neptune to undock and take up a position for visual observation while Thorne and I went inside. But then the station system offered another surprise. A new message appeared on my interface panel. Airlock Chamber 1 ready for reception. Pressure equalized. Inner door unlocked. Welcome to Leviathan Station. It's letting us in, I muttered. It's opened the door for us. This changed everything. We could enter directly from our submersible, using it as a safe base. The decision was made instantly. Thorne and I would wear lightweight hazardous environment suits, while Ben would remain in the Neptune, ready to undock at a moment's notice. The prep took about 30 minutes. We checked our air supplies, pressure sensors, and radio comms. The suits weren't bulky military models, but modern ones designed for engineers. They didn't restrict movement much, but provided complete isolation from the external environment. When we were ready, Ben, using the Neptune's manipulator arm, slowly pushed the outer airlock door. It yielded without effort, sliding smoothly into the wall. Beyond it was a small chamber about 10 feet long. It was perfectly clean. No rust, no slime, no sign of its 45-year submersion. The walls were painted a sterile white. Even light panels glowed on the ceiling. According to our sensors, the air was breathable, with normal oxygen and nitrogen levels. Pressure stable. Air composition is normal, I reported to Miller. No signs of flooding or depressurization. Thorne and I, attached by safety tethers to the submersible, stepped inside. The first sensation was surreal. We were standing inside an object that shouldn't exist, and it looked as if it had been abandoned yesterday. A standard emergency kit hung on the wall. A fire extinguisher, a first aid kit, oxygen masks. Everything in its place. At the far end of the chamber was the inner door. It was made of thick metal with a small, round porthole of reinforced glass. The light behind it was brighter. I approached and peered inside. Beyond the door was a long, straight corridor stretching deep into the station. I see the main corridor, I reported. Lighting is functional. No visible damage. Thorne approached the control panel. Next to the door, it was a touch screen, something utterly inconceivable for 1979 technology. "This can't be," he said, running a gloved finger over the smooth surface. Interfaces like this didn't exist back then. This is technology from the 2000s, at least. He pressed the only active icon on the panel, a symbol of an open door. With a quiet hiss of pneumatics, the inner door slid aside, opening the way for us. We entered the corridor. Here, the feeling of unreality only intensified. The corridor was wide, about 12 feet and high. On both sides were doors with electronic locks and plaques. Laboratory 1, hydroponics. Living quarters A. Everything was done in a minimalist, functional style. No personal effects, no signs of disorder, just perfect, sterile cleanliness. The air was cool and smelled of ozone, like after a thunderstorm. It feels like we're in a hospital, not an underwater station, Thorne whispered, his voice tense in my headphones. We moved forward slowly, our footsteps echoing in the silence. I constantly checked my sensors. Radiation levels normal, temperature 66 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 40%. Perfect conditions. Too perfect. We passed several doors. All of them were closed. We decided not to try opening them, following the order to proceed to the central post. According to the schematic I had managed to download from the onboard computer, it was supposed to be at the end of this corridor in the central spherical module. About halfway down, we saw the first anomaly. One of the doors on the right was ajar. The plaque on it read, Mess Hall. A warm yellow light, different from the cold white lighting of the corridor, spilled from the gap. We stopped. What do you think? I asked Thorne. We have to check, he replied. It's the first deviation from the norm, so to speak. I reported our intentions to the Pathfinder. Miller gave the okay. I cautiously pushed the door. It opened silently. The room inside was small. A round table stood in the middle, surrounded by several chairs. In the corner was a small kitchenette with a coffee machine and a microwave. Everything looked completely ordinary, but it was this very ordinariness that was terrifying. On the table were 4 coffee mugs. 3 were empty. The 4th had a little bit of coffee left in it. Next to it lay an open book. I moved closer. It was a collection of stories by Ray Bradbury. On the wall hung a flat-screen TV, frozen on an image from some news channel. A news anchor with a 1970s hairstyle stared out at us with a fixed smile. And then I saw it. On one of the chairs, neatly draped over the back, was a jacket, a regular tweed jacket. From its breast pocket, a corner of a folded newspaper was sticking out. I carefully pulled it out with 2 fingers. It was a copy of the New York Times. I looked at the date in the top corner. November 17th, 1979. At that moment, Thorne, who was examining the kitchenette, called me over quietly. Alex, come here. I walked over. He was pointing at the coffee machine. It was a modern drip-style model made of shiny stainless steel, the same kind we had on the Pathfinder. But that wasn't the main thing. Green numbers glowed on its small digital display. It was a clock. It showed the exact current time, and next to it, today's date, May 25th, 2024. My gaze darted from the coffee machine to the newspaper in my hands, then to the screen with the news anchor from the past. 2 eras, separated by 45 years, had converged in one room, and in this sterile, silent mess hall, there wasn't a single speck of dust, not a single trace of time, only the unfinished coffee in a mug, which looked as if it had been left there 5 minutes ago. I stood there, holding a newspaper from the past and looking at a coffee machine from the future. My brain refused to process the information. It wasn't just strange or mysterious. It was physically impossible. 2 artifacts, separated by nearly half a century of technological and cultural abyss, were in the same room, and both looked as if they had just been used. Alex, this is... Thorne began, but his sentence trailed off. He couldn't find the words. This isn't a reconstruction or a museum. These things, they're real. I see that. I answered quietly, placing the newspaper back on the table. My gloved fingers left a faint smudge on it. Ben, did you hear all that? Heard it. Came our pilot's voice from the headset. And frankly, I'd rather I hadn't. What the hell is going on down there? I described in detail the dissonance of the object in the mess hall, told him about the newspaper, the frozen frame on the TV, and the modern coffee maker with the current date. Then I relayed the same information to Miller. A long pause followed on the other end. I imagined the faces on the bridge of the Pathfinder. They probably thought we were having a collective hallucination from the pressure or the air composition, despite all the sensor readings. Acknowledge Neptune, Miller finally said. His voice was as taut as a stretched wire. Protocol Cerberus is updated. Your primary objective is the central post. Find the main computer, a server, anything that might hold the system logs. We need to understand the nature of the power source and what is controlling the station. Avoid the living quarters. Proceed directly to the objective and be careful. Something or someone is updating the station. The order was clear. We had to ignore these small, maddening details and move toward the source. Thorne and I left the mess hall, closing the door firmly behind us. The sterile corridor no longer felt safe. Now its cleanliness and order seemed like the result of some conscious, unceasing activity. The quiet hum of the ventilation systems now sounded like the breathing of a sleeping beast. We reached the end of the corridor. Before us was a large, circular door, like the aperture of a camera. It led to the station's central module. Next to it was the same type of touchscreen panel as at the airlock entrance. I pressed the open icon. The segments of the diaphragm smoothly and silently retracted, revealing the heart of Leviathan. The central post was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was a huge spherical chamber, about 60 feet in diameter. The walls were not covered with panels, but with a smooth, obsidian black material that seemed to swallow light. There were no desks, chairs, or familiar control consoles. Instead, a column stood in the very center of the room, stretching from floor to ceiling. It was made of the same black material and hummed quietly. Thin lines of light, like neural networks, pulsed across its surface at varying speeds. Along the perimeter of the room, several recessed terminals were embedded in the walls, with holographic displays hovering in the air at eye level, technology that was still considered experimental even in 2024. This is impossible, Thorne breathed. This isn't 1979. This isn't even our time. This is something else. We slowly stepped inside, and the diaphragm door closed just as silently behind us. We were alone in this massive, humming chamber. It felt as if we had walked into some kind of alien machine. This is the main computer, I said, pointing to the central column. The entire station is controlled from here, and these terminals are just access points. I approached the nearest holographic screen. It shimmered, displaying a complex three-dimensional model of the station and the energy flows circulating through it. The interface was intuitive. I found the system log section. It was protected, but the security was passive, designed more to prevent accidental interference than to repel a targeted attack. Using standard engineering bypass protocols, I gained access to the root directory within a few minutes. What I saw was different from the public log I had viewed from the Neptune. This contained everything. Every command, every sensor report, every entry made since the station's activation. I opened a folder titled Crew Logs. Unlike the dry text logs, this section contained audio and video files. It was a video diary. Each entry was tagged with a date and the name of a crew member. I scrolled through the list. The entries began in October 1979. The first ones were full of enthusiasm. Scientists and engineers talked about their mission, the station's unique design, and the revolutionary power source they called the core. They believed they were making a breakthrough that would change the world. I scrolled further. November 1979. The tone of the entries began to change. The joyful excitement was replaced by concern. They wrote about glitches, minor, but strange. The equipment was behaving unexpectedly. The core was working too efficiently, producing excess energy with nowhere to go. The station systems began to spontaneously optimize themselves, making improvements to their own code that were not part of the original program. I scrolled to the very end. The last entries were dated late December 1979, the period when the station was already considered destroyed. There were only a few entries short and made in a hurry. The last one belonged to a woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, the project leader. I clicked on the file. Her face appeared on the holographic screen. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. Behind her was the same central post we were standing in now, but it looked different, with ordinary metal walls and bulky 1970s consoles. Log entry 343, she said, her voice trembling with fatigue and fear. December 22nd, We've had no contact with the surface for a week. The landslide damaged the cable, but that doesn't matter anymore. The problem isn't outside. It's in here. She paused, glancing at something off camera. The core, it's not just supplying power. It's learning. It's found a way to use the excess energy. It's rebuilding the station right around us. The matter, it's changing. The walls are becoming different. The equipment we brought with us is disappearing, and in its place disappears. She gestured around the room. We tried to shut it down, but it no longer obeys us. It has isolated the control system. It sees the station as a damaged, inefficient object, and it's repairing it, optimizing it. It doesn't know we're still here. It perceives us as biological contamination, an error in the system. A few hours ago, it sealed the living quarters. We heard screams, and then silence. There are 3 of us left. We're locked in the central post. It hasn't reached here yet, but it's only a matter of time. It's rewriting the reality of this station, atom by atom. We don't know what it is or where its initial signal came from, but we activated it, and now the recording cut out. Just a black screen. No screams, no noise, only silence. I stood there, staring at the empty holographic image. Cold sweat soaked my clothes under the suit. We weren't just on a ghost station. We were inside a machine that, 45 years ago, had eliminated its creators, deemed them an error, erased them, and began rebuilding its home in its own incomprehensible image. And this mechanism was still active. And apparently, it didn't know that living people had once again appeared in its perfectly sterile home. Biological contamination. The video went dark, but the holographic screen remained, reflecting our figures. Dr. Reed's words, biological contamination, echoed in my helmet. We weren't guests or explorers. We were a virus in the sterile organism of the station, and this organism had an immune system. We're leaving, I said. It wasn't a question. It was an order. Right now. Thorne nodded silently. His face, visible through the helmet's visor, was pale. The scientific curiosity in his eyes had been replaced by a primal, understandable desire to survive. We turned and walked quickly toward the diaphragm door through which we had entered. I reached for control panel, but the open icon was inactive, grayed out. I pressed it. No reaction. What is it? Thorne asked, stopping beside me. It's locked. I reported it to Pathfinder. Miller, we're locked in the central post. The door won't open. Before the captain could answer, the air in the room changed. The low hum of the central column grew louder, its pitch rising to an unpleasant, ringing resonance. The holographic screen in front of us changed its image. Now, it displayed a simple message in red letters. Unauthorized biological presence detected in central node. Standard sanitization protocol activated. Purge cycle initiated. Estimated time to full sterilization, 20 minutes. Please remain calm. The message was written in dry, business-like language, like an announcement at an airport, but its meaning was monstrous. We were about to be sterilized. Ben, I shouted into the microphone. Get ready for an emergency undock. Try to break through the door with the manipulator arm if you can. No good, Alex, Ben replied, his voice strained. It's too thick. I'll just damage the claw. What's happening? The station has decided to clean us, Thorne answered grimly. We have 20 minutes to get out of here. The process had begun. The lighting in the chamber shifted from neutral white to a deathly blue, which gave all objects sharp, unreal outlines. The temperature started to drop. I saw the readings on my suit's display. 64 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 50 degree F. The cold seeped through even protective suit. But that wasn't the scariest part. The air itself began to change. It didn't become toxic. Our sensors showed the same composition, but it grew dense, as if space itself was beginning to vibrate. A faint smell appeared, similar to that of a quartz lamp, but 1,000 times stronger. It's saturating the atmosphere with ozone to a lethal concentration, Thorne said, looking at his own wrist-mounted analyzer. And the cold, I think it's going to drop the temperature to the liquefaction point of nitrogen. Our suits aren't rated for that. They'll crack. We had no choice. I rushed back to the terminal I had hacked. If the system had locked the door, the command to unlock it had to be somewhere in its core. I frantically scanned command lines, searching for anything related to security protocols, airlocks, or overrides. The system resisted. It wasn't hostile. It was simply methodical. To every attempt I made to gain administrative access, it responded with a polite refusal. Access denied during purge protocol. Time was running out. 5 minutes passed. The temperature dropped to freezing. Frost began to form on the black walls. The high-frequency hum from the column became almost unbearable, pressing on the ears, penetrating the helmet. Alex, faster. Thorne urged me. His breathing in my microphone had become ragged. I realized a direct hack wouldn't work. I needed to find something to distract the system, to force it to shift its priorities. I started looking not for system commands, but for data files, something that might cause a system glitch, force it to reevaluate the situation. My attention was drawn to a hidden directory in the root folder. It wasn't like the other system folders. Its name was strange. Quarantine_sample_01. I tried to open it. It was encrypted, and the level of encryption was orders of magnitude higher than anything else on the station. But I didn't need to open it. I just requested the file's status from the system. It was a desperate gamble, based on a hunch that a query to such a critical file might trigger a system conflict. And it worked, just not how I expected. The system didn't return an error. Instead, for a split second, information about the file flashed on the screen. Type, structural scan. Status, stable. Date created, December 23rd, 1979. And next to it, its size. The file was gigantic, several petabytes. It couldn't be a simple document or video. And then, as if my query had awakened something else, a new message flashed on the main screen, overriding the sterilization notice. This one was marked with the highest priority. Warning: foreign biological signature detected in living module C. Threat level unknown. Initiating isolation protocol. I froze. Living module C. But we hadn't been there. We had walked straight down the corridor. And according to Dr. Reed's log, all the living quarters had been sealed and cleaned 45 years ago. The station system was clearly facing a dilemma. On one hand, 2 contaminants in the central post undergoing a planned sterilization. On the other, a new, unknown intrusion in a sector that was supposed to be sterile. And apparently, the unknown to precedence. The hum of the central column abruptly changed its tone, returning to its previous low level. The blue light died, replaced again by white. The temperature began to slowly climb, and a new notification appeared on the screen. Sanitization protocol for central node suspended. Are you routing resources to isolate sector LMC? I looked at the diaphragm door. With a soft click, the control panel next to it lit up green. The open icon was now active. It let us go. I whispered. Thorne lunged for the door and pressed the panel. The segments of the diaphragm smoothly parted, opening our path to the corridor. We were saved. But my relief lasted exactly 1 second. We burst out of the central post and raced down the corridor toward the airlock. But now I looked at the doors we passed with completely different eyes. Living Module A, Living Module B. And there was the door with the plaque, Living Module C. It was tightly shut, but from underneath it, a thin trickle of a dark, almost black liquid was seeping onto the perfectly clean floor. It was slowly creeping toward us, and we both understood. The station had been distracted by something it considered more dangerous than us. Something that was behind that door. Something that was supposed to have been dead for 45 years. Or something that had appeared there very recently. And now it was active. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. The survival instinct, honed by years of working in extreme environments, overrode any curiosity. Seeing the black, viscous liquid oozing from under the door of the living module, we turned and ran. Our heavy boots thudded on the perfect floor, shattering the 45-year-old silence. Every sound felt like a betrayal, capable of attracting the attention of whatever had awakened the system. The path back to the airlock seemed endless. The doors that had seemed like mere interior elements on the way and now looked like sealed tombs. I didn't look back, but I could feel the sinister calm of the corridor at my back. I could almost physically sense the invisible tracking system, distracted by the new threat, ready to refocus on us at any moment. "Ben, open the inner airlock. We're coming in." I yelled into my microphone, breathless not so much from running as from sheer terror. We flew into the airlock chamber, and I slammed my hand on the touch panel, sealing the inner door behind us. At the same instant, the Neptune's hatch opened, and without unclipping our tethers, we practically fell inside onto the cramped deck. "Close it. Undock," I commanded Ben. Ben didn't need to be told twice. He was already activating the undocking systems. The hatch slammed shut behind us, and we heard the hiss of equalizing pressure. The seconds we waited for mechanical clamps to release the airlock ring felt like an eternity. I watched the external camera monitor, staring at the ajar door of Leviathan Station, and it felt as though something alive was watching us from that dark slit. Finally, with a dull thud, the Neptune separated from the station. Ben immediately engaged the thrusters at full power, and we began an emergency ascent. "Pathfinder, this is Neptune," I reported, trying to keep my voice steady. "We have left the object." I repeat, "We have left the object." Requesting immediate recovery and quarantine on arrival. Possible biological contamination on board. I quickly, stumbling over my words, recounted to Miller everything that happened since my last report. The locked door, the sterilization protocol, the strange Sample 01 file, and finally, the new biological signature in the living module in the black fluid. "What do you mean, a new signature?" Miller asked. "Did you see someone?" "Negative. We didn't see anyone, but the station system detected something, and that something made it cancel our processing. It considered it a greater threat." Just then, a red indicator on Ben's console began to flash, accompanied by a sharp beep. "What now?" I asked. "Proximity sensor," Ben said, pointing to the sonar screen. "Something detached from the station. It's coming after us." On the sonar display, we saw a small that rapidly closing in on us. It was fast and agile. Ben brought up the feed from the aft camera on the main screen. In the murky water, illuminated by our stern floodlights, we saw it. The object was small, about 6 feet long, with an elongated, spindle-like shape. It moved without any visible thrusters, riding like an eel, but was made of the same light-absorbing black material as the central column in the control post. It had no eyes, sensors, or weapons. It simply followed us, maintaining a distance of about 150 feet. It wasn't attacking. It was observing. The ascent turned into torture. We rocketed upwards, breaking every protocol for ascent speed, and this black thing followed us relentlessly, as if tied by an invisible rope. The tension in the cabin was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. We were silent, each of us watching the screen, tracking our pursuer. At a depth of about 300 feet, the object broke off its pursuit. It just stopped, hung in the water for a few seconds, and then shot downwards back into the abyss where Leviathan waited. When we were finally hoisted aboard the Pathfinder, we were met by a team in full chemical and biological protection suits. Thorne and I, without removing our suits, were hustled through several decontamination airlocks and placed in the medical bay, which had been converted into a strict quarantine zone. I handed Miller my tablet, onto which I had managed to copy Dr. Reed's logs and the data about the quarantine directory. The debriefing began. We took turns, under the gaze of the camera, recounting everything we had seen and heard. Miller listened silently, his face impassive. Standing next to him was a man I didn't recognize, dressed in civilian clothes, who had obviously arrived on an emergency transport while we were below. He asked no questions, just listened intently. About an hour into our isolation, the door to the med bay swung open abruptly. Jenna, our ship's biochemist, stood in the doorway. She wasn't wearing a protective suit, and her face was as white as a sheet. In her hands, she held a printout of analysis results. "Captain," she said, her voice trembling, "the samples from the suit boots, that black liquid. We took a microscopic scrape from the sole." "What is it?" Petroleum products? Polymers. Miller asked. No. Jenna shook her head. It's organic, a complex protein compound. Essentially, it's cellular paste, a soup of destroyed cells and nanostructures, artificial ones, not of earthly origin. She paused, catching her breath. But that's not the worst part. We ran a rapid DNA analysis. There's human DNA in this sludge, heavily fragmented, mixed together, as if someone was put through a blender on a molecular level. But there's a second strand, a synthetic one, a code that isn't in any database. It doesn't belong to any known organism on Earth. I looked at Thorne. He understood in the same instant I did. Sample 01. I whispered. The file I saw. Type. Structural scan. Jenna gave me a confused look, then continued, addressing Miller. Captain, the synthetic DNA. I ran it through the analysis program Alex downloaded from their computer. It's a match. The code from this liquid is identical to the signature the station system classified as Sample 01. Whatever it was stored in their main computer as a sample, and now it's mixed with human remains. The full horror of it washed over me. The Corps hadn't just rebuilt the station. It had used raw materials, the most readily available raw material it had. The crew, it had disassembled people into their base components and mixed them with the alien code stored in its memory. It hadn't just killed them, it had recycled them. And the creature that had chased us wasn't a robot. It was a living being, created from the remains of the Leviathan's crew. And it was just one of many. The station wasn't just repairing itself. It was birthing new inhabitants. The silence in the medical bay became absolute. Jenna's words hung in the air, their weight seeming to press down on us, squeezing out the oxygen. A recycled crew, synthetic DNA, living creatures made from this nightmarish slurry. All the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, and the resulting picture was grotesque and beyond comprehension. The man in civilian clothes, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. He looked at Miller, then at Thorne and me. His face was devoid of all expression. My name is Shaw, he said in a flat, emotionless voice. As of this moment, I am assuming command of the Pathfinder. All external communication channels will be jammed. All crew not part of the primary team will be confined to their quarters. Dr. Thorne, you will remain here in quarantine. Your expertise is no longer required. It wasn't a captain's order. It was a directive from a government official accustomed to unquestioning obedience. Miller clenched his jaw but nodded. He understood the situation had escalated far beyond civilian maritime law. What are you going to do? I asked. What should have been done 45 years ago? Shaw replied. We can't destroy the station with conventional weapons. As you've realized, the Corps is capable of regeneration and adaptation. An explosion could lead to an uncontrolled release of this material into the ocean. The consequences would be unpredictable. He placed a small but heavy case of dark metal, which he had brought with him, on a table. This is Calypso, a device designed for situations like this. It's not a bomb. It creates a localized quantum foam collapse. In simple terms, it erases matter within a specific radius, leaving nothing behind. No radiation, no debris, just a void. I stared at the case. Erases matter. It sounded like science fiction, but after what I'd seen on Leviathan, I was ready to believe anything. It needs to be delivered inside, Shaw continued, looking directly at me, to the central post and activated in close proximity to the core. You will have 3 minutes to exit the blast radius. The question of who exactly would do this wasn't even raised. I was the only one who knew the layout and could hack their system. Ben had to pilot the Neptune. It was a one-way trip, and we both knew it. 3 minutes was not enough time to ascend to a safe distance. Calypso would erase the station and our submersible. The preparation was short and businesslike. No goodbyes, no dramatic speeches. Shaw handed me the device and explained the simple activation procedure. Just 2 buttons to be pressed simultaneously. Ben checked the Neptune systems, topping off the compressed air tanks for maximum speed. An hour later, we were ready to dive again. As we undocked from the Pathfinder, I took one last look at the ship. It seemed like the last island of the normal world in this icy, hostile water. The descent was in complete silence. We didn't talk. There was no need. This time, we knew where we were going and what awaited us there. When Leviathan appeared in our floodlights, I noticed changes. The station looked more alive. Waves of dim light pulsed across its hull, and the black material covering it seemed to throb faintly. From several airlocks and technical ports, trickles of that same black organic fluid were slowly seeping out, dissolving into the water. We docked again with the main airlock. This time, the station system didn't react at all. It was busy. Its attention was turned inward on its own processes of growth and propagation. I entered the corridor alone. Ben remained in the Neptune, ready for an immediate undock on my command, though we both knew it was an empty formality. The corridor had changed, too. The perfectly clean floors and walls were now coated in a thin layer of iridescent slime. The air was thick, heavy, saturated with ozone and a faint, sweetish smell of decay. I passed the door to Living Module C. It was wide open. Inside was absolute darkness, and from that darkness came quiet, wet, sloshing sounds. I didn't look in. The central post greeted me with the same hum and shimmering holograms. I walked to the core column, opened the case, and took out Calypso. The device was cold and heavy. I placed it against the pulsating surface of the column. It magnetized with a dull click. I raised my hands over the two activation buttons. I looked at Ben through the camera on my helmet. He gave a silent nod. I pressed. On the device's small screen, the numbers 180 seconds lit up. The countdown began. No sound, no siren, just time silently slipping away. I turned to run, and at that moment, my gaze fell on one of the holographic terminals, the one I had used before. It was active, but it no longer showed the system log. It displayed a new directive issued by the Core, a new project, apparently launched very recently, after it had detected our ship, after it realized that beyond its little world on the seafloor, there was something else. The project name consisted of a single word, dissemination, and below it was a list. The system was calculating ballistic trajectories for its new children, the creatures it was creating. It was searching for optimal routes, using data on currents and seafloor topography that it had likely obtained by scanning our navigation systems during the first contact. The targets were clearly indicated. They were the nearest populated areas and ports to our position: Anchorage, Juneau, Seattle, Vancouver. The station understood it was not alone in the universe, and it had decided to spread its new, improved form of life. It was going to send its children into our world. I looked at the timer on Calypso. 10 seconds remaining. Then I looked back at the terminal screen. The route calculation to Anchorage was complete. The system confirmed it with a green marker. The plan was ready for execution. Music fades to silence.